My name is Emily Carter. I want to tell this story plainly, without drama or metaphors, because the facts are what mattered when I finally took control. I do not want sympathy, and I am not asking for approval. I am only telling how I moved from being trapped inside a marriage that ate at me, to making a choice that changed both of our lives. I met Oliver at a public lecture about urban development. He sat alone in the third row, wearing a coat that made him look more expensive than he was. He spoke clearly, short sentences, confident opinions. When the audience dispersed, I lingered to look at the model of a proposed community garden. He walked up behind me, explained a structural problem in 2 sentences, and asked if I wanted a coffee. We had coffee. We dated. After 6 months I believed, like most people around us, that we were stable and sensible. We married because the next step felt right. People said we were suited. We moved in together, threw ourselves into our jobs, and used weekends to see museums and try restaurants. He was patient with my family and polite with mine. He smiled when I told him silly plans. He was, at first, what he had promised. Problems began as small things. He corrected me in public, pronounced my comments naive in company. When I disagreed with him at dinner with friends, he laughed, and the laughter landed on me like a stone. If I said I wanted to do something for myself, to take a short course, to work full days again, he asked why I would waste the time. In a tone that made his opinion feel like law once. In the middle of a conversation, he said, "You get upset over trifles. Try not to take things personally." It would have been nothing if he had said it once and left it. He said it often. It became the frame through which everyone around us began to see me, the sensible man, and the emotional wife. A marriage at that point is a daily negotiation. I shrank my opinions to avoid fights. I started measuring my words. In small choices I deferred to him. That is how the isolation built itself, not by force, but by eroding permission for me to exist as a full person in our life. The first time I saw messages on his phone I thought it would be a quick explanation. I was tired, and he had left his phone on the couch. A message preview popped up. Last night was perfect. See you Friday? From someone called Sophie. I froze. I told myself to breathe. I waited for him to explain. When he came home I asked that he did not deny the messages outright. He smiled the quiet smile of someone practiced at reassurance and said, "You're imagining it, Em. You're being paranoid." He told me I was sensitive, which was his code for saying I was being irrational. He made it a personal flaw, not his issue. And so the gaslighting began. The second time I saw proof, hotel receipts, a photo of him with another woman at a private club, I knew this was more than a failing. It was a deliberate pattern. I confronted him differently then. I put the photo on the table and looked at him. He put his hands on the back of a chair and said, almost bored, "You're overreacting. If you make this public, you'll look like the wife who can't deal with your husband being successful." That threat was layered. He was saying 2 things, that he had the power to shape people's opinions, and that if I tried to expose him, I would lose. You learn quickly, if you want to stay and fight, that control often runs through money. He handled most of our finances. He liked the silence of signing things, of telling me it's been sorted when I asked about bills. So I began with money. Quietly, without drama, I reopened my freelance contacts. I took on extra work editing copy, small writing jobs. After a few months I had enough saved in a separate account to feel like I could breathe, even if he cut me off. Independence is boring to describe, but it is effective. Next, I made a private decision. I would collect evidence. I was practical about it. Emotions are useful, but evidence is what courts and journalists use. I began to photograph receipts I found, to save screenshots of messages, to record the times he said certain things in arguments. I started writing a log, date, time, what was said. I wrote nothing emotional in that log, only details. 12 March, 2015. Oliver left the house claiming to go to the office. Phone location data shows he was at the Carlisle Hotel. Receipt found in suitcase. I treated it like collecting items for a case. I told one person the truth, my friend Clara from university. Clara had always been practical. She listened without drama. When I told her, she asked the basic question, "What do you want?" I said, straight, "I want out of this, and I don't want him to get away with hurting other people like this." She did not lecture. She said, "We will figure this, and we will do it with evidence." Clara introduced me to someone she trusted in the world of investigative reporting, James Holloway. James is not a cliché. He asked forensic questions, wanted proof, and did not sugarcoat anything. He asked to see documents and emails. He asked direct questions about who was involved and what appeared on accounts. He steered me toward something I had only half suspected, that Oliver's deception was not limited to personal affairs. He had business dealings that were sloppy and secretive. There were gaps where invoices should have been, payments routed through companies that did not seem to have real activity. When I learned that, I stopped thinking of this as only private betrayal. It was also fraud, and if it was fraud, it could be exposed in public and punished legally. That did not mean it would be easy. It meant it might be possible. The first big break came through Sophie. I had watched the messages for months, saving them, annotating their dates. Eventually Sophie, either out of guilt, fear, or her own motives, reached out. She asked to meet. She sat opposite me in a cafe and shook her head like someone tired. "You should stop meeting him," I said. It was simple, she laughed, a sound like a small cough. "What, leave him and ruin him?" "No. He promised to help me. He promised protection. I have bills, Emily. I can't risk everything." We talked for an hour. She cried once. She showed me emails where Oliver promised to move funds for her father's investment scheme, then delayed the transfers. She showed me contracts with signatures I later realized were not original, copies saved and forwarded. She gave me a copy of an invoice. "This is not clean," she said. He told me not to worry. He has a way of making people trust him. I did not offer pity. I took what she gave me, wrote everything down, and photographed the documents. Sophie was not innocent. She had chosen to be a part of this life. But her testimony, her documents, and her willingness to speak would be crucial. She provided internal emails that connected Oliver to transfers routed through shell accounts. She did not know whose accounts, exactly, but the trail existed. James took what I had to a journalist he knew at a national paper. The reporter did the next kind of work I could not do on my own. He verified details, double-checked bank records, and asked for comments. He spoke to an auditor who, when given a paper trail, confirmed what we suspected: funds were being moved without legitimate invoices. Accounts had been opened in the names of companies with no staff and no premises. It looked like laundering by a method that relied on charm, contacts, and sloppy bookkeeping. Oliver noticed the shifting air. He was not stupid about threats. He was arrogant in a way that made him careless. He made more mistakes. He left a file at the office unlocked. He let a partner keep a hard copy of a transfer. Every mistake was something we logged. He began to suspect me. He pulled me aside one evening and said, "What are you doing? Who are you talking to?" He tried to sound casual, but his voice trembled. "Nothing," I said. I had learned to make my voice the smoothest thing in the room. Anger shows. Smoothness conceals. I said, "I want things to be normal." "Normal?" He narrowed his eyes. "Normal would be if you stopped being childish." He used a public phrase then, something to shape how other people would see me. "If you keep this up, people will say you're unstable." He meant it. He had decided that I, the wife, could be easily dismissed with a phrase if he anchored it in other people's minds. So I did what I had planned. I became neutral. I became small in public. I put on the performance he expected. He relaxed. That was our advantage. While he relaxed, James and the journalist were working on a slow, careful piece. When the day came that the paper ran the first major piece exposing the transfers and suspicious company formations, everything shifted. The headline was short and factual: "Investors question Oliver Grant Group." The article listed the shell company names and included comments from a forensic accountant. There was a coldness to it. It was not a takedown piece with grand language. It said what could be proven. How people react to that kind of exposure depends on how much risk they can tolerate. Investors tolerated none. One partner called Oliver and demanded an explanation. Another froze payment pending an audit. The rumor mill went quiet, then loud with small, practical consequences. People who had once toasted his success began to ask for paperwork. The reaction took shape in phased steps. First, his close friends, those who had benefited, stayed quiet and waited. Second, partners asked for statements and copies of directors' minutes. Third, the Financial Conduct Office received a tip and opened a small inquiry. Oliver had created a structure that depended on people continuing to believe in him. That belief eroded one meeting at a time. Oliver tried to fight in the only way he knew how, by attacking impressions. He took to social media to post pictures of us at events, smiling. He made comments that made me out to be the jealous wife. He sent emails to some journalists in which he painted a picture of me as vindictive and unstable. He used performance, photos and public statements to try to shift the narrative back toward a personal dispute. The method is common: make it about the private quarrel and hope the public tires of following the paper trail. At that point I felt something I had not expected. The impact of being publicly scrutinized as more than a criminal suspect. Friends wavered. Some were polite but distant. I watched a man I had loved use a public playbook designed to save himself at the expense of anyone who disagreed with him. It was ugly. It hurt. A reputation is social and it can be torn by noise. I kept writing down details, handing documents to James, answering follow-up questions. My role became more like a clerk in a slow case than an avenger. The journalist who had taken the story was careful. He moved only when he had verifiable links. One evening he told me over the phone, "We can publish, but be ready." It was advice and a warning. We were ready. The paper published a follow-up, detailed examples of how money had moved, with redactions where legal risk required them. The story included a quote from an auditor who described the accounts as irregular. The combination of evidence and an auditor's professional voice tilted things. More investors demanded transparency. The company's bank put incoming funds on hold while they undertook checks. Partners who had clapped the loudest now asked for a meeting to review accounts. His response hardened. He called me into an argument at home and shouted, "You will not do this to me." He slammed a door. He said I was destroying his life. He said he would do everything in his power to retaliate: legal threats, defamation counterclaims, public statements. He suggested the obvious tactic: claim I was a woman scorned. He thought that the simplicity of that narrative would outrun facts, but facts had momentum. 2 weeks later, an official inquiry letter arrived at Oliver's office asking for documentation. For the first time he was forced to produce bank records. He discovered that several payments could not be justified with contractual obligations. He began to stumble and to give answers that did not satisfy auditors. The thing he feared most was practical, not moral, loss of funding. Without funding, his projects would be delayed or cancelled. And that delayed cancellation revealed the structure underneath: an image, a presentation, a set of promises that had never had a firm foundation. What surprised me most was how his anger became desperation. For weeks he oscillated between furious meetings and sullen withdrawal. He began to show up at home tired in a different way, the way people do after they have been told no by the world and are left to account for how they lied. In court he used every tactic available. He filed preliminary claims, hired expensive lawyers to file injunctions, and tried to get the media to drop parts of the story on technicalities. He leaned on friends for statements. He begged and threatened in private. He made a call to my employer, trying to create the impression that I had been the one stirring trouble for professional reasons. Sophie took the stand. She had been terrified to do it, and she sat with her hands folded. Her testimony was inconsistent at points. Her fear and guilt made that honest, but she delivered the key facts: that Oliver had promised funds and not transferred them, that he had directed her to accept certain investments, and that he had been involved in routing money through companies that had the appearance of legitimacy but no real operation. Her voice shook, but the pattern was clear. In law, pattern matters. He tried, in court, to depict me as someone on a mission of revenge and therefore untrustworthy. There is always a contest in cases like these, whether the public sees claims of wrongdoing as part of a vendetta or as part of legitimate accountability. The judge looked at documents. The judge listened to auditors. The judge looked at bank records. The judge also looked at the names on the page and asked, "Why are funds moving this way? Why are invoices missing? Why are shell companies receiving money in a manner consistent with diversion?" When the ruling came, it was not melodramatic. He was forced to disclose accounts, to pay fines and restitutions, and to accept restrictions on his business activities. Investors demanded compensation. Some of his partners cut ties. The kind of social humiliation that I had once imagined as theatrical instead arrived as quiet practical consequences: cancelled contracts, frozen accounts, no invitations to speak at panels. His social phone stopped ringing for business. Afterward, he came to our old flat. I remember the way he stood in the doorway and looked small under the hallway light. He said, in a voice that tried to be reasonable, "Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me and I'll change." It was both an apology and a test. He wanted an answer he could use, a neat sentence that would allow him to perform remorse. I gave him a list. I said, "You learned to silence people so you could get what you wanted. You measured me and decided what was useful about me. You lied to people who trusted you. You treated me as a problem rather than a partner." I said the small things as plainly as the big things. He did not say much. He listened and left. I moved cities within a month. I took a tiny flat in a part of Manchester where I could hear birds in the morning. I wrote, slowly, and I started a small training program teaching practical skills to women who had found themselves alone in difficult situations. I taught them what I had learned: keep receipts, save screenshots, maintain a log. Those skills sound petty until you need them. They are not pills for grief. They are tools for being believed. People asked if I felt vindictive. Some asked if I could have forgiven. The truth is simple: I was not fighting to hurt someone because I enjoyed it. I was fighting to recover currency of my own life. That included dignity, finances, and the ability to tell the truth and be believed. There were softer things in time: a new group of friends who trusted me, a slow normality that was not loud but genuine. There was a man I met in a class I taught who listened, not because he wanted anything from me but because he respected the small daily things I worked at. There was less drama and more daylight in decisions I made: my schedule, my projects, my boundaries. One small final detail: Oliver wrote me a letter months later. He wrote a letter because he wanted to frame his own redemption, to create a document where he could be the protagonist again. He asked to meet to close this properly. I burned the letter in a pan on my stove without reading beyond the first lines. The paper turned black, and the heat smelt of old things. Burning it felt like ending something, not with noise but with a practical smallness. It was not grand. It was precise. If there is any lesson in this record, it is this: keep the records. Listen to the facts. Find the people who will treat your evidence seriously. Systems are slow, but they are procedural and they can be used. It is possible to be worn down by a person who uses charm as a shield. It is also possible to collect the small things that make the big case. This is what I did: I watched, I gathered, and I moved in steps. I did not crave cruelty. I wanted a way out that did not mean erasing myself, and I wanted to make sure he did not keep doing the same thing to someone else. In the end, local consequences and legal processes removed the mechanics that allowed him to hurt others. I live now where the light comes through properly. I teach, I write, and I keep lists. On some mornings I still feel the residue of what happened, like the memory of a cold room. But I do not let that memory tell me who I am. I have found a way to live by facts and to ask for them to be heard. That was, for me, the most practical and necessary revenge.